She was rising fast, too fast. Caroline Leavitt, the sharp-witted White House press secretary, had built a reputation as one of the fiercest defenders of the administration. But in Washington, power comes at a price. When allegations surfaced about her 2022 congressional campaign receiving hundreds of thousands in illegal contributions, the tide began to turn. What followed was a political firestorm, a desperate fight for survival, and a reckoning that no one saw coming. This is the story of the scandal that threatened to unravel it all, and the stunning twist that changed everything. Caroline Leavitt's political career had always defied expectations. A young conservative firebrand, she stormed onto the national stage with a confidence that belied her years. From her early days as a communications director in the Trump administration to her rapid rise as White House press secretary, she carried herself with a sense of purpose that many seasoned politicians lacked. Her ability to deflect criticism, craft cutting sound bites, and turn press briefings into battlegrounds had made her a favorite among the administration supporters. She was the new face of conservative media, a symbol of resilience, aggression, and unwavering loyalty. But Washington is a city that thrives on secrets. Behind every political ascent, there are shadows, whispers that trail behind even the most untouchable figures. For Leavitt, those whispers began as murmurs of admiration. How had she climbed so high so fast? How had a congressional candidate from New Hampshire, who had lost her bid for office, managed to pivot into one of the most powerful roles in the country? The answers were hidden in the numbers. It started as a routine review. Political watchdogs, journalists, and financial analysts regularly combed through Federal Election Commission filings, looking for irregularities in campaign donations. It was a tedious, thankless task, one that rarely yielded anything more than minor oversights or misreported expenditures. But then, something strange surfaced in Leavitt's records. A pattern, a series of contributions that didn't quite add up. The numbers told a story of excess, of financial flows that far exceeded legal limits. In total, over $300,000 in questionable donations had made their way into her campaign's war chest. The problem? Federal election laws placed strict limits on individual contributions, and these funds appear to have bypassed those restrictions in ways that were, at best, highly suspicious, and at worst, outright illegal. For months, the discrepancies had gone unnoticed. The world of campaign finance is a labyrinth of loopholes where PACs, bundlers, and dark money influence can obscure even the most egregious violations. But this was different. The funds weren't just coming from anonymous sources or shell organizations. They were coming from well-connected individuals who had already maxed out their allowable contributions. Instead of stopping, the money had kept flowing, rerouted through obscure entities and secondary donors. A textbook case of campaign finance laundering. At first, the red flags didn't raise much concern outside of small investigative circles. But in Washington, even the smallest scandal has the potential to ignite a wildfire. The first sparks came in the form of anonymous tips. A congressional staffer, frustrated with the lack of oversight in the system, quietly leaked a portion of the findings to a journalist known for exposing financial corruption. A few weeks later, whispers of Leavitt's money problem began circulating in political backchannels. Then, a quiet request was made to the FEC for a deeper review of her campaign finances. The storm was coming. Leavitt's enemies were waiting for a moment like this. As one of the most combative figures in the administration, she had made no shortage of political rivals, both inside and outside of her own party. For months, she had stood at the podium, dismantling media narratives, attacking the credibility of Washington's press elite, and defending policies that many viewed as indefensible. She was a warrior, but warriors accumulate enemies. When the allegations finally surfaced in the media, they hit like a thunderclap. The first headline ran on a niche political blog, but within hours, it spread like wildfire across mainstream news outlets. Leavitt's campaign finance scandal. Did she take illegal contributions? The article laid out the numbers in excruciating detail. The donors, the limits they had exceeded, and the suspicious means by which the excess funds had been funneled through intermediaries. Washington erupted. The White House was caught off guard. While scandals were nothing new in the Trump orbit, this one was different. It wasn't a policy controversy, a personal indiscretion, or a clash with the media. It was a direct violation of campaign finance laws, the kind of legal jeopardy that could spell the end of a career. For the first time in her tenure as press secretary, Karoline Leavitt was the one in the hot seat. The news cycle exploded. Political commentators dissected every detail of the allegations. Campaign finance experts debated the legality of the donations, and opposition figures pounced on the scandal as evidence of widespread corruption within the administration. The pressure was immediate and relentless. Leavitt's response was as aggressive as expected. She dismissed the allegations as politically motivated, an orchestrated attack designed to undermine her credibility. But the weight of the evidence was undeniable, and as more reports surfaced, it became clear that this was not just another manufactured scandal. It was a real and tangible threat. Behind closed doors, discussions in the West Wing turned tense. Was this defensible? Could Leavitt withstand the pressure? Or was she becoming a liability? The calculus was simple. Washington only protects those who remain useful. If the scandal spiraled out of control, the administration would have no choice but to distance itself. But Leavitt was not one to go down without a fight. As the political storm raged around her, she made a fateful decision, one that would set the stage for the most dramatic chapter of her career. She wouldn't just defend herself in the press. She would take the fight directly to her accusers. And in doing so, she would uncover something even more explosive than anyone had anticipated. The weight of the scandal pressed down on Karoline Leavitt like an iron vice. Washington was merciless, a city where power shifted like sand, and those caught in the storm were either buried or forced to claw their way back to the surface. The headlines had been relentless, dissecting every dollar, every donor, every financial maneuver that had fueled her congressional campaign. It was no longer just about the numbers. It was about trust, integrity, and the perception that she had played fast and loose with the rules. Perception, in Washington, was often more dangerous than reality. The administration had yet to issue an official response beyond Leavitt's initial dismissal of the allegations. But behind the scenes, the conversations had turned brutal. White House strategists and legal teams huddled in private, calculating their next move. The stakes were high, too high. The president himself had remained uncharacteristically silent on the matter, a silence that signaled a brutal truth. Leavitt was on her own. For the first time since stepping into the political arena, she could feel the ground beneath her starting to crack. She had two choices: play defense, deny everything, and hope the scandal died out in the relentless churn of the news cycle, or go on the offensive, attack the very forces that were trying to take her down. The latter was the only option. Washington operated on leverage. Scandals weren't just born out of thin air. They were orchestrated, calculated, weaponized. Someone had leaked those financial records. Someone had waited for the perfect moment to strike. And Leavitt was determined to find out who had orchestrated the attack. The first place to start was the Federal Election Commission itself. She knew the mechanics of campaign finance investigations. They rarely started without external pressure. The FEC wasn't an aggressive watchdog. It was a bureaucratic machine that only moved when prodded. The question was, who had prodded it? The first real clue came in the form of a quiet tip from a former campaign aide. A whisper in a back-channel conversation. Someone inside the administration had been feeding opposition researchers with financial discrepancies months before the scandal broke. It wasn't just an attack from political enemies. It was sabotage from within. The list of suspects was shorter than she would have liked. Washington was full of knives, but the ones in your own camp were always the sharpest. While the political fallout continued to spread, she worked behind the scenes, tapping in her network, making discreet calls, setting up off-the-record meetings. She needed names, connections, anything that could point her toward the source. In the meantime, the media firestorm raged on. Cable news networks ran endless panels analyzing the situation. Some conservative commentators defended her, calling it a witch hunt designed to bring down one of the administration's most effective communicators. Others, including those with closer ties to the Republican establishment, were less forgiving. They saw her as reckless, a liability that could drag the administration into deeper legal trouble. Then the worst blow landed. A congressional ethics committee announced that it was launching an inquiry. The scandal had now moved from media speculation to formal investigation. This wasn't just about her reputation anymore. It was about legal consequences. The pressure inside the White House intensified. Senior advisors began whispering about damage control, about the possibility of an early resignation before the situation became untenable. The administration had no problem cutting people loose when they became a liability. Leavitt knew this well. She had seen it happen to others before her. If she didn't fight back now, she would be next. But she wasn't done. As the ethics probe loomed, she finally got the breakthrough she had been waiting for. A financial analyst who had worked closely with opposition researchers confirmed that the leak hadn't just been an act of investigative diligence. It had been an operation, coordinated and deliberate, designed to time the release of the information for maximum damage. And the source? Someone close to the Republican leadership. It was the kind of revelation that could turn the entire scandal on its head. If Leavitt had been set up by her own party, the scandal wasn't just about illegal contributions. It was about internal power struggles, about factions within the GOP maneuvering to consolidate control ahead of the next election cycle. And if she could prove it, she could change the narrative entirely. But proving it was another challenge altogether. She needed hard evidence. Emails, text messages, anything that could establish the timeline of the leak and who had orchestrated it. The problem was, whoever had done this had covered their tracks well. The leaks had been passed through intermediaries, layered through think tanks and opposition research firms before reaching journalists. There were no obvious fingerprints. But in Washington, no secret remained buried forever. She pushed forward with the investigation even as the congressional inquiry began. She worked in the shadows while the media painted her as a politician on the brink of collapse. Every news cycle was another blow, another wave of pressure demanding that she step down, disappear, fade into irrelevance. She refused, and then the first crack in the conspiracy emerged. A low-level staffer, someone buried in the trenches of opposition research, made a mistake. In an overconfident exchange with a journalist, he admitted that the timing of the scandal had been coordinated with certain figures in Republican leadership. It was an off-the-record conversation, but nothing in Washington was ever truly off the record. The information made its way back to Leavitt's team. It was the opening she needed. She wasn't just going to defend herself anymore. She was going to burn the entire operation to the ground. The next phase of her battle would not be fought in the press room or on cable news panels. It would be fought behind closed doors, in strategy sessions, in quiet deals, and whispered threats. The people who had set her up had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated her. And now, it was her turn to strike back. The corridors of power in Washington are not built for the weak. They reward those who understand the game, who learn how to wield influence not just in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Karoline Leavitt had spent years perfecting the art of control, crafting her image as an unshakable force in conservative politics. But now, the game had turned against her. She wasn't just fighting accusations of illegal campaign contributions anymore. She was fighting for survival against an enemy hidden within her own ranks. The news cycle had reached a fever pitch. Every day, a new headline dissected her downfall. Every night, a panel of talking heads debated whether she could withstand the pressure. The ethics inquiry loomed over her like a guillotine, waiting for the moment to fall. And yet, she had found something, a crack in the narrative. Someone within her own party had orchestrated the leak, feeding opposition researchers the financial records that had turned her into a political pariah. But she still didn't have proof, not the kind that would exonerate her and shift the target elsewhere. She had to move carefully. A direct accusation without evidence would only tighten the noose around her neck. The press wouldn't buy it, and worse, the administration wouldn't tolerate it. The White House had already begun to distance itself, offering lukewarm support while privately weighing whether to push her out. The silence from the president's inner circle was the loudest warning. But Karoline Leavitt had never been one to wait for permission. She started making quiet moves of her own, tapping into contacts she had cultivated over the years. Washington ran on favors, on debts unpaid, and alliances forged in crisis. She reached out to a former intelligence officer, someone who had once handled discreet political operations, the kind of man who knew how to make problems disappear. The meeting was brief. No details, no direct requests. Just a simple statement. Find me what I need. And then she waited. In the meantime, she played her part in public. She appeared at press briefings, her tone defiant but controlled. She dismissed the allegations as a smear campaign, calling out the hypocrisy of a system where campaign finance violations were common, but only selectively punished. She was neither innocent nor guilty. She knew how the system worked. She had seen it before, how scandals could be manufactured, how power could be wielded through whispers rather than laws. She had played that game herself. Now, she was simply fighting not to be its latest casualty. Days passed. The pressure mounted. The Ethics Committee was set to convene for an initial hearing. Washington insiders speculated that it was only a matter of time before she would be forced to resign. And then, finally, her contact came through. A file, encrypted, delivered through a secure channel. She opened it alone, in the quiet of her apartment, away from prying eyes. Inside, the proof she needed, the timeline of the leak. The messages exchanged between opposition researchers and a senior aide in Republican leadership. Not a direct order, but close enough. The phrasing was careful, designed to avoid exposure, but the intent was clear. She had been sacrificed, not by the Democrats, not by the media, by her own people. The question now was, what was she willing to do about it? The obvious choice was to go public, leak the files, expose the betrayal, turn the scandal back on those who had tried to bury her. But Washington didn't work that way. Revenge had to be precise. Karoline knew that if she detonated the bomb too early, she would only destroy herself in the process. The party would close ranks. The administration would cut her loose. She needed leverage, not chaos. So, instead, she made a few phone calls. To the right people. To those who understood that power wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about who had the ability to cause the most damage. And then, she waited. The next morning, the tide began to shift. A sudden statement from an anonymous White House official expressing full confidence in Leavitt's ability to weather the storm. A brief but telling silence from the Ethics Committee, delaying their inquiry by a week. And then, a subtle but undeniable shift in media coverage. The focus moved slightly, away from Leavitt, towards the people who had been whispering the loudest about her downfall. She had sent a message. I know what you did, and I'm not afraid to use it. There would be no public reckoning, no grand reveal of betrayal. That wasn't how Washington worked. Instead, there would be quiet retractions, a slow de-escalation of the scandal, a backroom deal or two, and then the machine would move on, looking for its next victim. Karoline Leavitt wasn't good. She wasn't evil. She was simply someone who understood the rules of the game, and she had just played them better than anyone expected. The air in Washington had changed. The frenzy around Karoline Leavitt's scandal was slowing, not because the story had faded, but because something else had taken its place. That was how the city worked. Scandals didn't die, they were replaced. And Leavitt had ensured that the focus shifted elsewhere. Her maneuvering had been subtle. No grand declarations, no explosive leaks, just pressure applied in the right places at the right time. She had made the people who wanted her gone realize that their safest option was to let the story fade. But nothing in Washington came without a cost. The silence from her enemies wasn't surrender, it was a calculation. They had tried to remove her once, and they had failed. But that didn't mean they wouldn't try again. She wasn't safe. Not yet. And now, she had to decide what kind of player she truly wanted to be. The meeting was set for late evening in a quiet townhouse just outside of Capitol Hill. The kind of place where conversations didn't leave a paper trail, where deniable deals were made. She arrived alone. No aides, no staff. Inside, waiting for her, was the man she had expected. He wasn't an official, not in any real sense. He worked in the spaces between government, between party leadership and the donor class, between those who issued orders and those who made sure those orders were carried out. A fixer. He had been sent to deliver a message. The conversation was simple. She had made her move, and now she was being given a choice. Stay in line. Keep quiet. Accept that she had been bruised, but not broken. And in return, she could keep her position, keep her influence, maybe even secure a greater role in the future. Or push further. Expose what she knew. Fight back in a way that could bring others down with her. But if she did that, the consequences would be unpredictable. There was no direct threat. That wasn't how these things worked. Just a reality check. She was useful now. She had proven that she could survive an attack. That made her valuable. But if she became a problem, if she became unpredictable, then she would find herself truly alone. Washington didn't punish people for what they did. It punished them for failing to play the game correctly. And the game was offering her an out. The fixer left without waiting for an answer. She already knew what it would be. Leavitt sat alone that night, staring at the city lights from her apartment window. She had clawed her way back from the edge. She had turned the tide. But was it really a victory? She had seen how the game worked from the inside before, but never like this. It wasn't about policy. It wasn't about ideology. It wasn't even about loyalty. It was about power. Who controlled it? Who wielded it? And who was allowed to keep it? The scandal had been a test, a warning shot, and she had survived. But survival was not the same as winning, because now she belonged to the system in a way she never had before. She could still fight back. She could still break the silence, take the risk, expose the truth. But what would it change? Would the public care? Would the voters understand the depth of what really happened behind closed doors? Or would they see only what the headlines told them? She wasn't sure anymore. For the first time in her career, she wasn't certain if the truth even mattered. The next day, she walked into the White House as if nothing had changed. She stood behind the podium, met the cameras with the same practiced confidence, and delivered the administration's message with the same unwavering tone. The scandal that had nearly ended her career was now nothing more than a talking point, a footnote in the relentless churn of Washington politics. And Caroline Leavitt remained exactly where she had always been. For now, the days passed, and the scandal that had nearly ended Caroline Leavitt's career became just another story buried under the weight of Washington's endless chaos. The headlines moved on. The ethics inquiry stalled. The political machine churned forward, unfazed. She had won, or at least she had survived. But survival had come at a cost. The weight of what she knew sat heavy on her shoulders. The truth of the betrayal, the quiet negotiations, the unspoken rules of the game she had now fully embraced. She had never been naive. She had understood Washington's brutality from the moment she stepped into the arena. But knowing something and experiencing it firsthand were two different things. Now, she wasn't just a participant in the system. She was bound to it. The final test came in a way she hadn't expected. A journalist, one of the few who had remained relentless in pursuing the story, reached out. They had questions. They had new information. Someone, somewhere, had been feeding them details that hinted at the deeper layers of the scandal. Not just about the campaign contributions, but about the power struggle that had led to the leak. And they wanted a statement from Leavitt. It was the kind of moment that defined careers. She could confirm the journalist's suspicions. She could tell them everything she had uncovered, name the people who had orchestrated the leak, expose the system for what it was. It would be a risk, of course, but it would also be the truth. Or she could do nothing, let the story die, move forward, as she had been advised to. Protect herself. She sat with the decision for hours, alone in her office, staring at the journalist's message. There was a time when she would have answered immediately, when she would have relished the chance to fight back. But now, she wasn't sure anymore. She thought about what she had learned in the past weeks. The quiet conversations, the power plays, the warnings wrapped in friendly gestures. She thought about what had happened to others who had tried to expose the system from the inside. They didn't survive. Not politically. Not personally. Washington didn't reward truth tellers. It rewarded survivors. She reached for her phone, typed a response, then deleted it. The next morning, the story that could have exposed everything disappeared, buried beneath the next big controversy. The journalist moved on. The public forgot. And Karoline Leavitt stood behind the White House podium, delivering the administration's message as if nothing had ever happened. The weight of silence pressed down on her, but she didn't let it show. Because in Washington, survival wasn't about what you fought for. It was about knowing when to let the truth go. And Karoline Leavitt had learned that lesson well. The end. That concludes the story. It leaves Karoline's morality ambiguous, highlighting the price of power in Washington.